Greetings. You're listening to the CEIE podcast at Seattle University in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, where life is about making meaning.
I'm Reid Trice, the Spear-Halligan Professor and Director of the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University, and today I have the real pleasure of speaking with Professor David Elcott, who has spent the last 37 years at the intersection of community building, the search for a theology of cross-boundary engagement and interfaith and ethnic social justice organizing and activism. I could begin perhaps by saying that the rise of illiberal democracies, and I hope you'll take issue or refine this further, may be illiberal democracies, which describes for the listener those governing systems that hide its non-democratic practices behind formally democratic institutions and procedures. So what may appear to be a kind of functional liberal democracy, it actually is using illiberal ends to achieve particular means. And this is a discussion that's been happening not just in academic, but in kind of popular circles since at least the mid-1990s. I'd like to ask you, David, what you think and how you would clarify that further. But perhaps we could begin with that said as a preliminary statement, and then go right to the premise of your book, which I think, as I read, is to state that the standing of liberal democracy and democratic governance as an efficient political system capable of addressing the range of issues facing nations today has been terribly compromised. Why? If there's a cardinal failure of liberal democracy today, what's the problem with liberal democracy that's challenging us so much today in the world?
So there was this sense following World War II, there was kind of a reckoning about what does it mean to be a human being in the post-World War II period, in which the understanding both of the extraordinary debasement that can take place, the evil that can take place even within the context of a, so to speak, normal country, right? That we're not talking about some period from 3,000-4,000 years ago. We're not talking about even about per se the types of ethnic or religious battles of the Middle Ages. But here we're talking about what otherwise we would have said were perfectly normal countries that did horrible, horrible things. And I don't think we need to ignore the fact that Hitler and Nazism took some awareness from the American system of slavery and segregation. So I don't want it to sound as if this was some unique German issue. It seemed to be a seed that was located within nationalism around the world. But when the war was over, you look at legislation passed both within countries, but also with the United Nations, a real focus on human rights, civil rights, the dignity of the human being. And the presumption was that liberal democracy, the ability of nations that have citizens who participate in the entire civil process, not just elections alone, that they engage as citizens, that they are rewarded in that to the benefits that should come from a liberal democracy, which is personal freedom and economic stability, economic rights, human rights, civil rights. And in the decades immediately afterwards, I must say, there was that sense that economic disparities were lessening, that the sweep of freedom was rolling not only in Europe, in North America, but in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, as nations were allowed finally to be relieved or were able to remove themselves from the colonial situations and establish nations with integrity. So there was this real sense that allowed even, by 1990, to have a great scholar say it is the end of history because liberal democracy has triumphed. What, of course, was not seen at the time was an enormous dissatisfaction, increasing economic disparity, unbelievable global wealth, countries that were no longer fully in control of their own economy as major international corporations could move from place to place, extract minerals from one place, produce them some products someplace else, sell them back to poor countries, the burdens of loans that undermine democracy, that there was this sense on an economic level of failure. But I think there was something more serious that was being missed. Globalization had the promise for certain people of the whole world is mine. I can go anywhere. I can do anything. One day I could eat Thai food and next day Japanese food and the day after that Cuban food because we are one universal brotherhood and sisterhood.
Mm-hmm.
And what was not clear was for a significant portion of the populations of the world, there was the sense of, wait a moment, I'm being left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Hold it. What happened to those values, the behaviors, the rituals, the culture that seemed to be mine and that I shared with my country? And suddenly, instead, my leaders are globe-trotting, hugging each other around the world and leaving me behind.
Yeah.
We're not always sensitive to the fact that about 50% of the population of the United States does not even have a passport. The idea that they would go to experience other countries and other cultures, that's not part of their interest. Or in a very graphic way, you say, some people are here, and then the other people who are nowhere. So I'm somewhere in my community, in my culture, which is tied with my religion, with my history, with the way I see the world. And there are these other people, they could be anywhere, but they're no longer sharing with me the culture that I believe is at the core of my identity, and therefore the political system of which I want to be a part. So first off, we had economic disparity. Then we had a sense of cultural loss. And then I have to add one more element here that I think much of the liberal, as we say, the liberal democracy community do not sense. For many, and I'll now speak specifically of America, for many Americans, they felt they have been standing patiently in line for their turn, their turn to benefit from the American promise. They've been standing in line patiently, and suddenly, well, gays are jumping in front of them, and African Americans are jumping in front of them. And now even people who are coming illegally over the border are getting benefits, and I'm still waiting in line for my turn. And I begin to resent that and feel, wait, who is interested in me? Who's caring for me? So I think these three elements, economic disparity, that globalization is hurting me, cultural disparity, that there is no place for me any longer in this political system, for me, my values, my concerns, my customs, right? And third, that I'm being left behind. All these others are jumping ahead of me.
Right after World War II, we have the Declaration on Human Rights. I believe that's 1946. You have an overwhelming number of nations that signed on to this. There was a kind of high point of a celebratory feeling after the Second World War. Since that time, we've had no less than 258 different kinds of global conflicts, which have certainly lessened the sense of the kind of global sentiment that we had achieved something internationally by consensus or quasi-consensus, that there was a declaration of kind of shared sense of values aligned to liberal democracy. Perhaps I wonder if you could comment on that. The other is, I want to ask you, now in the United States, when we think particularly this current administration, on the economic disparity, for instance, we have in the Bidenomics, so-called, we have an administration that has committed itself to reindustrialization. That's important, let's say, but they've missed an opportunity in the message box to talk about this strong suit for liberal democracy, where only 7 to 9% of the U.S. population is aligned with a particular union, let's say, and only 11 to 12% of the national GDP is coming from the industrial sector. So my point is, the message of our shared values, the kind of message of where, to my earlier question, of where the kind of cardinal failure of liberal democracy, the meaning making within society, it seems like there are seminal points where at the governance level, we've missed an opportunity to align the meaning making to those values in a particularly fragile moment.
Democracy, we hear about it first, 2,500 years ago in the Greek world, which of course only referred to a very small segment of the population. Under 10% of the population were allowed to so participate. And that continues on, even, for example, if we use England, which is the mother of our democracy in the United States, even there was a very limited portion of the population that was allowed to participate. There was this sense that only those who have a true stake in what matters, and a stake in what matters mainly had to do with economic stake. So the very poor were irrelevant. Those who were landed and then later were merchants, slowly but surely could gain greater access. But there was this idea that somehow the state then, as nations began to develop, that the states represent the will of the people. And there you get that most in the great political philosopher Rousseau, who made a claim that the only shared purpose we can find is that confirmed by the people. And I have to leave the word "the people" kind of open and blank. In the French Revolution, they were killing the leadership, but in the English Revolution, it really was to maintain the power of the elite class against the monarchy. In America, in the United States, of course, in its beginning, it was limited enfranchisement. The Senate was controlled through legislature. There was no popular vote. And even to this day, the idea of the people voting, and that is the absolute will, is not accepted. We are a limited democracy in that sense because we have an electoral college, and the electoral college determines who's going to be president, not the popular vote. And as we know, in the last decades, we have had repeated cases of the popular vote going one way and the election determined in another way. So we understand both the principle of democracy being full participation of its citizenry, and then the limitation on democracy is who really gets to have a part, who really gets to play in the game. In the United States, over these last decades, this portion of the population, again, often the less educated segment of the population, working class, their feeling was that somehow it doesn't matter what they see above the line, because below the line, there are nefarious forces that are in fact pulling all the strings, and that can play itself out in conspiracy theories of anti-Semitism. It can play itself out in Hollywood in control. It can play itself out in some conspiracy of the global elite. Right. However it plays out, there's this sense of, I'm not represented in any way at all. It's exacerbated by the response of the elites. I want to read to you from an article written in 2016 during that election. This is what the author wrote. Morally, the Trump supporters are indefensible. The white American underclass is enthralled to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. Donald Trump's speeches make them feel good. So does OxyContin. As you can imagine, that doesn't help in trying to address the discrepancies among the American population of what exactly is going on here.
Right.
And when you get that type of shutdown response, we can't be shocked that people are going to say, okay, then maybe we need something completely different. We need to destroy the system, or as the language used by the right wing in America, we need to starve the beast.
Right. The value of listening in a democracy as a core virtue is something I'd like to ask you about,
Oh,
which
it's
I
so
think is a
painful.
point you're making.
It's painful. It's painful as you say that, because of course that presumes a shared discourse.
Yeah.
That presumes shared facts, that we're looking at the same picture. When I was a little kid, when Walter Cronkite came on CBS News, he was truth. Everyone
Yeah.
listened, and he spoke the word. When President Kennedy was assassinated, I was a kid. When he was assassinated, I remember it was Walter Cronkite who announced it, and the country all heard the same voice.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, clearly there were many things lacking in that, but today we have a very different circumstance. Well over 70% of the population only hears certain voices, only hears certain facts.
The 60th anniversary of the Munich Security Conference just met, and a number of those leaders in discussion of what was characterized as a lose-lose scenario, one of the worst things you want to hear in a conference of that kind, described the guiding value geopolitically as mutual impunity. Also not great to hear. Impunity in terms of a value of not only seeking my best interest, but a kind of guarded suspicion against the other. This last point about the role of faith in helping bridge the gap in a liberal democracy in the United States, where people feel isolated, where people do feel secluded, and it's feeding a kind of impunity or anger or fear that is raising the national temperature. Is that how you see it in the United States? Is it fear or anger, impunity that stops us? How do you describe that?
Clearly, monotheism has a dilemma. If you believe that there is one God and that I know who that God is and what that God is and what that God wants of me, and it's the only truth, then that can dovetail very easily with kind of a nationalist view of there's only one nation, I have the best nation in my nation, love my country, right or wrong. If you don't like it, you can leave or you should be destroyed. There's another piece that I write about often for me, which is that the hubris of saying I know what God is way back from in the Judeo-Christian and Muslim tradition, is a form of idolatry.
Yeah.
I don't know whether those who gave us the Bible or the Quran, if they really thought that some statue had power. For me, it always seemed much more the idea that we could know God.
Yeah.
And that became a heresy within all the traditions. So that modesty should leave space for everyone to say, I have my faith, but my faith isn't absolute. It's not complete. Because there's a big distance between my apprehension of the world, of what is right and wrong, of God, and the ultimate infinite God. So I need to be more modest, and that is where pluralism comes in. It says, I believe what I believe, I'm faithful to it, but I'm open to recognizing you may have some understanding that I don't, from which I can benefit as a person of faith. But when you feel that you're being shut down, that your values are being undermined, ignored, that nobody really is interested in. And ironically, we can see the same thing on the left, not in the name of God, but in the name of some other type of absolute truth coming from the left. Then what do? You fall back and say, okay, I'm going to clothe myself with my own belief, with my own faith, because I'm being assaulted. And what I think we have, and what is so painful, is everywhere I go, every place I interviewed, people feel under assault. It could be a liberal Protestant church in New England. It could be a Catholic Latino church in the LA area. It could be a born-again Christian Covenant of God church in Georgia. It could be a synagogue in Miami. It could be a mosque in Dearborn. Everybody feels they're under assault. How can you have a democracy when everybody within the democracy feels threatened, not externally, but internally threatened? And so what do? You fall back on that which is most comfortable, most clear, and try to cut out everyone else. That's on the issues of faith. How does that inform democracy? Well, the idea that when I walk into the voting booth, I rid myself of my religious self was always foolish from the day, not only the day the Republic was founded, but from long before. The founders of this country, and if we understand the Mayflower Compact, saw themselves as coming to a new Israel, an Israel that is covenanted with God, and that God will, exactly as our music says, God will bless America.
I think what you're demonstrating also in all of the conversations that you've had around the country is precisely the listening that you're doing, right? You've heard this. You've been in those communities where on the far left or the far right, you're hearing the kind of fundamental concerns unrestricted by those who are saying this is the kind of moral concerns that I have, and they're rooted in faith, right? Aren't they? They're rooted in their sense of their core citizenry. And they're not just rooted in what it means to be an individual, but they're rooted in communities. You've written in this book about the rise of populism in a couple of different ways. I think it's important for the reader to have for the listener to have some sense of the appeal to a romanticized kind of mythic history as well, in light of how that gets conflated.
So here's the rub. I understand the despair. I really feel I've heard it. I understand the despair. I understand the sense of loss. But the antidote to that sense of loss is not to see in nationalism a kind of absolute truth, in no way separated from my religious faith. As an individual believer, I can believe, I can recognize other people don't agree with me, and I can be absolute in my faith. I think that's it. But when that is translated into the political domain, whether it's in a prior period, God commands me to go and kill people, or whether in our case, that my faith now merges with my nationalism, that my state becomes almost divine incarnate. That now is a whole different phenomenon, and that is a danger to us, because in that setting, you cannot allow for discourse within any more than you could allow for discourse within yourself over the absolute command of God. So suddenly the state becomes an embodiment of faith, as opposed to a civic structure of countrymen and women coming together. And in that setting, you get the development of populist nationalism, which leads to an illiberal democracy, which says the following. Liberal democracy says, look, let's talk about it as if it's a game. We're going to play this game. And the goal of the game isn't to win. The goal of the game is the game, is to keep the game going. So one time I'm going to lose, but the next round you're going to lose. And that's all right, because what matters to us is the game, the wholeness of the game that we share. Illiberal democracy, which is now the political manifestation of this populist nationalism fueled by religious absolutism, illiberal democracy says, oh, no, there's only one goal: to win the game. Because you know what people who don't win the game are? They're losers. And I don't want to be a loser. So I will do whatever it takes to win the game. Whereas the liberal democracy says, oh, there are rules to the game. Some of the rules are written, when you open up the package of the game, and there are rules. but some of them are just norms that we share, right? We don't hit each other over the head. We don't throw the game up in the air, even though it doesn't say in the book, don't throw the game up in the air, but we know not to do that. So there's a set of kind of written and accepted norms to the game, and we're not going to break those.
David, do you find, just so the listener tracks this as well, it's this last point, for those who would prefer not to have the balanced game, but would rather say the loser is the fool or the evildoer, or the one upon whom I will seek revenge. So by way of example, very specific example, at the end of the New Hampshire Republican primary, Donald Trump stood at the podium and noted that those who had lost have been the evildoer. I don't get angry, I seek revenge. We could talk about that. I'm more interested in those who were actually there and had voted for him, who were delighted by the win, who had felt like it was the right vote cast, who were not interested in the kind of seasoned back and forth game you're talking about, but were interested more in the charisma of the leader who was speaking truth in a new way. We've seen this in history as well. I don't want to make too much of that, but I wonder if you have a comment on that you'd like to just say something to.
The direction you're going is one, of course, that everyone we hope would have at least some anxiety. Look, let's go back again. If I feel that I've been losing, I've been losing out. All these others, they're all getting what was promised to me. Then the idea that I don't want to be a loser anymore, literally, I don't want to be a loser. And that was very much Donald Trump's language. With me, you're not going to be losers anymore. Well, there's something pretty appealing about that, right? Particularly for those of us who've been winners. I've got an academic degree, I have a nice house, my family is healthy, I don't have kids who are addicted, my kids have jobs, right? It's very easy for me to say, oh, I love democracy, I travel the world, But if I feel that I've been a loser, that I've been let down, that the system has failed me, is it really so terrible to cheer and say, I'm a winner finally? I'm standing in a gathering. Arlie Hochschild talks about this beautifully. There's a rally. And in that rally, instead of feeling shame and humiliation, instead of feeling that the elites look down on me, I feel powerful. I feel connected. I feel that my life is worthy. And why do I feel that way? Because that person up there tells me that my life is worthy. Why is it that when Joe Biden goes and marches on the picket line with United Auto Workers, why is it when the Democrats pass legislation to ensure a minimum wage, trying to ensure a living wage, why is it that that's not enough? Because economists are dead wrong. Sorry, economists, but I'm a political psychologist, right?
Why are they wrong?
Read Daniel Kahneman, right, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, even though he's a psychologist. Economists are wrong because they presume that economic benefits are the driver of decision-making. What's in my best interest is what's in my best economic interest. But what happens if what's in my best interest isn't spiritual, is emotional, is in a sense of the value of my life and the meaning of my life? And in that, it's not clear that liberal democracy can deliver as effectively that sense of meaning as nor, by the way, can liberal churches that speak in pluralism and speak in openness to each other. We're seeing the battle in the Catholic Church. We're seeing the battle with the Methodists. We're seeing the battle with the Presbyterians, right? It's saying, oh, we're all good, and no, right. I want to know that I'm good, right? So what happens if liberal democracy can't speak as powerfully to give me life meaning as can a populist nationalist leader who will hold up the Bible, not necessarily knowing what's in the Bible, but holding up the Bible as a symbol for me of, yes, that is truth. America is exceptional. My Bible is exceptional. I am exceptional. Now my life has more meaning.
And
That's what they're cheering for.
the far
That's
left liberals, absolutely, the far left liberals, even if he's holding that Bible upside down, have a hard time understanding and giving him credit, however shrewd, for being able to speak in a very specific, as you're noting, particular way to those core hunger points and thirst points of that population, because the far left, or even the left moderate liberal agenda, is not able to recognize that the core appeal, the appeal to those core universal values, is not paying the rent for that population. So how is it that, as we move in your book, and I know we have limited time now, but as we look at the role of the religious voice, the response, the role of religion, the kind of theological importance that can be a response of faith to this growing nationalism, popular nationalism, in very particular ways, in very specific ways, what is the role of religion as a response to those illiberal elements that is not going to just cede its voice to a kind of pablum of liberal universalism that may have paid the rent in the mid to late 60s, but has been, no kind of retread is going to do so now. How would you respond to that?
There's a very beautiful quote from a very, very Orthodox Jewish rabbi. If you looked at him, he's that picture of exactly what you would expect to see, named Rabbi Cook. And he had this very interesting quote. He said, the house of humanity, right? The house is built by various parts which don't necessarily agree with each other, but that all will become clear in the messianic time, how even those which are absolute opposites are critical for the building of the house. In other words, when we now speak straight, language from not only the Abrahamic traditions, but really the larger sense of believing traditions, which is what seems a contradiction to us can still be one with God. It is our limitation that we see the contradiction. That is an enormous act of humility. And I see religious humility and political humility being in the same, in the same sphere. Religious humility means I love my religion, I love my faith, I am a believer, but I know that there is a piece missing, like a piece of a puzzle missing, and others have those pieces from which I could learn. It's same in the political sphere. I may believe absolutely in that God wants, and the nation therefore needs to support, that two men or two women can marry, can live happily, can have a family, or I may believe the exact opposite. But a piece of me has to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm limited in my understanding. I need to at least listen to the other side. That religious humility could help inform political humility in this country. To say we need to listen. We don't need to agree, but we need to at least leave space for discourse. And within that discourse, we should be able to recognize that I don't own the truth, and that if I am defeated in an election, that is not the end of truth. That is not the loss of everything. It's the loss of an election. And the next election can be different if I can make a more convincing argument, right? That's what we need. We need that space, that humility that has been lost in America, and it's been lost obviously in the populist, nationalist, religious right. And their religion is fueling this extremism, and it's been lost on the left, where any particular view that I have is so absolute that a challenge to it is the ultimate sin. And it's ironic to me, right? So if we rather accept we're all sinners, we're all imperfect. It's tough being human. It's tough getting it right all the time, right? Let's leave a little space of humility. Now, that is something that I believe religious leaders can teach. Why? Because all the religions start from the vantage point of we're human, we sin, we fail. So leave space for growth. Every religious leader can say, leave space, and that's what liberal democracy is about. It is imperfect, but in its sinful imperfection, is the seed of perfection. And so our role is to support it, not to undermine it.
Wherever you are on the far left to the far right of the political or religious spectrum, Professor David Elcott noting that humility plays a core role. Religious humility leads toward that opening of political humility as possibility, which opens discourse. And discourse can take place, but it doesn't have to mean at the end of election, if I lose or you lose or win or I win, it's not the end of truth. And that truth continues irrespective of win or loss, right? It continues with the discourse. David Elcott, it's a pleasure to have you with us today on this podcast.
Thank you so much. It was really great being together.
I want to encourage the listener to go pick up the book, Faith, Nationalism, and the Future of Liberal Democracy. Read it, share it with your community, and discuss it. Thanks again.
You've been listening to the CEIE podcast at SU. Visit our Theolab at religica.org or renowned international journal of local stories from around the world at the interfaithobserver.org and participate in emerging opportunities at our main website, that's seattleu.edu/CEIE. Thank you.